There's a particular kind of silence that only exists in an office right before something ugly happens. Not the kind that's peaceful. No, this one is dense, full of held breaths, half-closed doors, and eyes that won't quite meet yours. I'd worked at Braxton and Cole International for 21 years, long enough to tell when the air changed. This Friday morning, it had. Phones still rang, keyboards still tapped, but there was a tension underneath it all, like the building itself was waiting for the blow. My office was tucked in a corner between legal and global operations, the perfect spot to watch everything without being in the middle of it. Normally, Randall Braxton, the CEO, passed my door on his way to morning meetings, stopping just long enough to murmur, "Celine, that Tokyo update." But today, nothing. Just absence. The rumors had started around 9 a.m. Randall had taken emergency medical leave. No farewell speech, no official email, just gone. And in his place, the rise of his son, Camden Braxton. I'd met Camden twice, once at the holiday gala, where he told me he was in fintech-adjacent ventures, and once in the elevator, where he mistook me for someone from the catering staff. He had that curated kind of charm, slim-fit blazer, no tie, perfect stubble, the kind of man who looked like he'd practiced his TED Talk in the mirror, but never learned how to pronounce the name of his own assistant. At 10:15, he strolled past my office without so much as a glance, heading straight for his father's office like it had always been his. I didn't flinch. I'd been invisible before. Then came the calendar ping, departmental realignment review. 4:30 p.m., no agenda, no explanation, just the kind of vague title that makes your stomach tighten. When I arrived at the conference room, Camden was already there, leaning back in a chair too big for him, flipping through a folder. He didn't look up. "Celine, right?" he said, like we'd met once at a forgettable party. "We're simplifying things, streamlining. Your department, cultural and linguistic strategy, is being outsourced. Singapore. Cost-effective, global reach." No discussion, no interest in what I actually did, he said, rationalizing 3 times before the end of his sentence, as if the repetition made it reasonable. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply slid my work laptop across the table, stood, and said, "Good luck with your Monday meeting." He frowned. "What meeting?" I said, "You'll find out," and walked away. By the time the severance email landed in my inbox, I was already home. And I already had a plan. I didn't spend the weekend angry. I didn't drink whiskey or call my friends to vent, and I didn't post anything cryptic on social media. Anger burns fast. What I needed was something colder, sharper, and far more enduring. So I cleaned. By Saturday afternoon, my dining table was lined with neat piles, cultural briefs tailored for clients, negotiation transcripts in 3 languages, and a stack of handwritten notes that had once turned hostile meetings into million-dollar contracts. I've always believed in keeping an emergency archive, not because I expect betrayal, but because I understand it's always a possibility. 21 years in the same company will teach you that loyalty is often a one-way street. In one folder, I had the Tokyo file, a delicate handwritten apology to a Japanese CFO who'd been insulted by a careless first-name address from one of our junior associates. I'd researched his family crest, found a lacquered pen to match, and sent it with the letter. That was the week we closed the $12 million deal. Another folder held the Abu Dhabi negotiations. A multi-million-dollar shipment was detained at customs due to conflicting codes. I'd spoken directly with the official, not just translating words, but using his formality, his cadence, his hierarchy. By the time Randall had his third espresso in Chicago, the shipment was already moving. None of this was in the official company records. Camden had no idea these moments even existed. And now, neither would the vendor he was replacing me with. I labeled 3 envelopes: cultural briefs, client-specific; performance archive, verified; client attrition risk, active. The last one was thin, but it mattered most. It listed the clients most likely to leave without me, not because I was irreplaceable, but because relationships aren't transferable like software licenses. Sunday evening, as the light faded across my apartment, I slipped the client attrition risk folder into a pouted envelope. I didn't address it, not yet. At 9:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. Kira, a young associate, nervous and brilliant in equal measure. "Celine, I know you're technically gone, but Gold March Group is here for the Monday meeting. They said they won't start without you. What should I tell them?" I typed back slowly, "I'm not available." She read it. No follow-up, no argument. I knew she'd forwarded up the chain. I closed my phone, took one last look at the stacks on my table, and slid the performance archive folder into my bag. I didn't know exactly when I'd use it, only that I would. Betrayal is loud. Retribution is quiet. And I had every intention of letting mine echo. By Monday morning, the quiet hum of the office was gone. In its place, tension so thick you could feel it through the walls. I wasn't there, of course. I was at my kitchen table, sipping tea from a cup I'd bought in Marrakesh 20 years ago. The kind of tea that forces you to slow down and pay attention. At 9:42 a.m., my phone rang. Not Kira this time. It was Marlene, head of legal. Sharp as glass and twice as dangerous when cornered. "Celine," she said without preamble. "Camden's in a meeting with Gold March Group. It's not going well." I let her speak. She explained that without my context, the translation team had missed a subtle shift in tone from the Gold March negotiators. What sounded like polite agreement in English was, in their culture, a precursor to disengagement. They were preparing to walk. "And now Camden's panicking," she finished. I almost smiled. "Marlene, I'm no longer with the company. You should remind him of that." She did, and hung up. By noon, the first email came through. Subject line: urgent inquiry, consulting availability. Not from Camden, from Gold March's senior liaison directly. A polite request for my independent rates. I didn't answer immediately. Let them sit with the question. Let them wonder if I was even interested. By Tuesday, 2 more former clients had reached out, each with their own "we prefer to work with you directly" messages. I added them to the client attrition risk list, which now felt less like a warning and more like a countdown. Meanwhile, Camden was trying to plug holes in a ship he didn't know was already taking on water. His new outsourced team in Singapore was technically proficient, but cultural nuance isn't something you download. It's something you earn over dinners, at early flights, in midnight calls that aren't on the invoice. On Thursday morning,
Kira called again, voice low like she was in a bathroom stall. They're holding an emergency strategy session tomorrow. Camden's blaming the team for not following protocol. People are furious. I thanked her, then went back to my tea. The thing about fracture lines is that they're invisible until pressure is applied. Then they widen fast. I didn't need to sabotage Camden. All I had to do was nothing. Let the weight of his own decisions bear down until the cracks spread. On Thursday morning, I printed the performance archive. Every success, every crisis averted, every $1 million save I'd made, and placed it in a plain envelope. I slid it into my desk drawer, ready for delivery. Not yet. Retribution isn't about speed. It's about precision. And I had all the time in the world.
The call came on a Friday morning, exactly 1 week after they'd shown me the door. "Celine, it's Camden," he said, trying to sound casual. "I think we got off on the wrong foot." I leaned back in my chair, let the pause stretch. "Did we?" "I want to be transparent," he continued. "We've hit some turbulence with a few accounts, and I've been thinking maybe we could bring you back on a contract basis." There it was, the olive branch wrapped in barbed wire. Contract basis. Translation, we want your expertise without your authority. I kept my tone even. What's the scope? Gold March, Karui Tack, a few others. We'd pay you per project. It's a great opportunity to ease back in without the overhead. Overhead. That's what he thought I was, a cost to be trimmed. "Camden, when you were 12, you tried to take your father's vintage watch apart to make it run better. Remember what happened?" He hesitated. "I broke it." "Yes, and then you came to me to fix it." "I didn't. I told you some things can't be put back the way they were." "This isn't the same," he said quickly. "It's exactly the same." Silence. I could almost hear him recalibrating. What would it take? Now we were in my territory. I said full creative control, no middlemen, direct client communication, my own team, my own budget, and triple the rate you're thinking of right now. He laughed, a short, nervous burst. "That's ambitious." "No, that's market value for me." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had lost its shine. "I'll think about it." "Do that," I said, and hung up. By the afternoon, I had an email from Gold March's liaison confirming they'd pause all activity until I was back on their account. Not if, until. That night, I wrote a simple note on a piece of cream stationery and slid it into an envelope. "Dear Camden, when you're ready to talk seriously, you know where to find me." I left it unsigned at the bottom of my building's front desk for the courier. No flourish, no explanation, just the promise of a conversation he'd have to come to on my terms. The truth was, I didn't need to go back, not to them. But there's a unique power in letting someone realize they need you more than you need them. It's not revenge, not yet. It's positioning. And positioning in the right hands can topple an empire. When you've been in the corporate trenches for over 3 decades, you collect things. Not just knickknacks on your desk or framed awards for outstanding contributions. I mean real things.
emails that were supposed to be deleted, draft memos that never went out, contracts that disappeared from the company's digital archive but somehow found their way into my private files. Camden Braxton had been in charge for less than a month, and already he was tightening his grip like a child playing King of the Hill. He was laying off the people who kept this place running, replacing them with his friends from business school, people with glossy resumes and zero staying power. But what he didn't understand was that empires aren't built in press releases and PowerPoints. They're built in the shadows, and I had the blueprints. That afternoon, I locked my office door for the first time in years. On my desk was a plain manila folder, unmarked, unassuming, just the way I liked it. Inside was a paper trail Camden didn't even know existed. Evidence of tax optimizations his father had quietly orchestrated, shady real estate transfers, internal memos that could make an investor meeting go nuclear. I didn't collect these things because I wanted to burn the place down. No, I collected them because the world is unpredictable and leverage is insurance. Camden thought I was a relic, a harmless leftover from a bygone era of business. That was my favorite kind of camouflage. My plan wasn't just to survive his strategic restructuring. My plan was to make him bleed corporate credibility until the board had no choice but to act. But first, I needed an opening. And openings rarely walk up and introduce themselves. They have to be carved. At 5 o'clock, when most people were thinking about happy hour, I walked down to archives. The new junior assistant at the desk, barely out of college, looked up from her phone. "Help you with something?" I smiled, the kind of smile that says, "I've been doing this longer than you've been alive." I need the physical lease documents for Braxton Holdings from 1991 through 1995. Originals. She frowned. "Those are in storage, off-site. I'll wait." The thing about being underestimated is that people never think you have the stamina to be a problem. 45 minutes later, she was sliding a dusty banker's box across the counter. I thanked her politely, took it back to my office, and locked the door again. Inside, under layers of irrelevant paperwork, was what I'd been hoping for. The original deed transfer for the land beneath Braxton & Cole's flagship headquarters. My name wasn't on it, but I knew whose was. And that person owed me a favor from a long, long time ago. I sat back, fingertips resting on the brittle paper, and felt the slow, satisfying rise of possibility. Camden thought he had me cornered. He had no idea I'd just found the map out.
The name on that deed was like a ghost from another lifetime. Richard Hawthorne. Back in '92, Richard was a young, cocky lawyer with an expensive tie habit and a knack for getting himself into legal messes. I'd pulled him out of one that could have ended his career before it began. It wasn't charity, it was strategy. In business, you don't just collect favors, you cultivate debts. And Richard's was the kind that accrued interest. I dialed the number I hadn't used in over a decade. 2 rings, then a deep, polished voice. "This is Hawthorne." I said, "It's Celine," kept my tone casual like we'd spoken just last week. "We need to talk about a piece of property you're holding for a friend." Silence, then a chuckle. "Celine Ward. I'd say this is a surprise, but somehow I'm not surprised at all." By the next morning, I was sitting across from him in the back corner of an old jazz club he now owned. The air smelled of wood polish and bourbon, and the sax player on stage played like the world was ending. Richard looked older, sure, silver hair, laugh lines, but his eyes were as sharp as the day I met him. "You're not calling me to reminisce," he said, swirling the ice in his glass. "So what's the play?" I slid the deed across the table. "This land is under your name, and your tenants, Braxton and Cole, are about to run it into the ground under new leadership. I want to make sure the lease terms evolve." Richard studied me. "You want control." "I want leverage," I corrected. "Control comes later." For a moment, I thought he'd refuse, but Richard was a man who respected the long game. He'd seen me play it before, and he knew I didn't bluff. "What's in it for me?" he asked. "Market rate rent review, which, given their current books, will feel like a noose. And when the noose tightens, we decide together where it leads." A slow smile spread across his face. "You always did know how to turn a knife without getting blood on your hands." By the time I left the club, the agreement was sealed, not in ink, but in the unshakable currency of mutual gain. Richard would quietly initiate a lease renegotiation, one that Camden wouldn't see coming until it was already halfway strangling his quarterly reports. That night, I walked back into my apartment, small, modest, intentionally under the radar, and poured myself a single glass of wine. On my kitchen table lay the folder of documents, now joined by a neatly typed list of next steps. Step 1 was complete. The beauty of a good trap isn't how quickly it snaps shut. It's in the moment before, when your opponent still thinks they're winning. Camden Braxton still believed he was untouchable. Soon he'd learn I was holding the ground under his feet, literally.
Camden Braxton never liked surprises, which is why when Richard sent over the formal lease review notification to Braxton and Cole's legal department, I could almost hear the sound of papers being slammed onto desks from 3 blocks away. I didn't deliver the blow all at once. No, that would have been sloppy. Instead, I let it drip, slow and deliberate, so the discomfort would spread before they even knew the source. The first drop landed on a Thursday morning. Richard's letter was crisp, polite, and devastatingly specific. Clauses citing updated market value assessments, timelines that required immediate compliance, and a list of comparable rents in the area that would triple their monthly obligations. It was an accountant's nightmare disguised as legal housekeeping. By noon, Camden was calling emergency meetings. By 3 p.m., half the executive team had their heads buried in spreadsheets, whispering in corridors as though the walls might be listening. They weren't wrong. I stayed invisible, just another retired consultant living quietly in her downtown apartment. But invisibility is a choice, not a condition. And right now, it was my most valuable weapon. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number. I let it ring twice before answering. "Celine Ward?" The voice was clipped, male, and carrying that thin edge of controlled panic. "This is Thomas Hill, General Counsel for Braxton and Cole. We need to discuss the property lease." I made a small, considering sound. "Do we? Because last I checked, I don't hold the lease. You'll want to talk to Mr. Hawthorne." There was a pause, too long to be casual. "We're aware of Mr. Hawthorne's involvement, but we also know your history with the company." I smiled into the silence. "Then you know I don't get involved in company affairs anymore. Have a good day, Mr. Hill." I hung up before he could respond. By evening, I had confirmation that Camden himself had been briefed. That's when I made my second move. Not in public, not even through Richard. I reached out to a single, very particular contact in the local business press. The kind who could sniff a corporate vulnerability before it even hit the rumor mill. The story wouldn't break yet, that would be reckless.
but a whisper in the right ear meant questions would start to circulate. Questions Camden couldn't control. That night, as I sipped my tea, I thought about the years I'd spent building that company, the deals I'd brokered, the crises I'd navigated, and how easily they'd let me go. No hesitation, no gratitude. Leverage wasn't just about contracts or money. It was about memory, and I was making damn sure they remembered who I was.
3 days after Richard's letter landed, Braxton and Cole went quiet. Not the kind of quiet you hear when a company is running smoothly. This was the kind of quiet where executives start canceling lunches, meetings get labeled confidential, and the receptionist suddenly can't transfer your call without checking if they're available. Camden was cornered. I knew it. He knew it. What he didn't know was that the pressure he felt wasn't coming only from his boardroom. It was about to come from the city itself. That morning, I met with Marla Danton, the journalist I'd tipped off. She was sharp as a tack and twice as fast, the kind of reporter who could smell blood and follow the trail before anyone else realized they were bleeding. "You're not giving me much," she said, flipping her notebook closed over a half-page of cryptic notes. "I'm giving you exactly enough," I told her. "You'll get the story, but only after I'm ready for it to be public." Her eyebrow arched. "And why would I wait?" "Because I know what you really want, Marla. You don't just want the scandal, you want the win. The full picture, not a rumor that dies in tomorrow's paper." She studied me for a long second, then slipped the notebook into her bag. "Call me when you're ready." By the time I returned home, Camden had left me a message. His voice was tight, almost metallic. "Celine, I think we need to talk privately. Call me." I didn't. Instead, I called Richard. "It's time," I said. "File the formal notice for rent adjustment. Make sure it's on record before Monday." Richard hesitated. "That'll be the kill shot, Celine. Once it's filed, there's no taking it back." "I'm not taking it back." That night, I sat by the window with my tea, watching the city lights blink on one by one. I thought about the years I'd given them, the loyalty I'd shown, the sacrifices they'd never seen. And I thought about the way they'd treated me when I stopped being convenient. They'd forgotten something vital. I don't need their approval. I don't even need their company. All I need is my name and the right moment to speak it. By Sunday, a whisper was moving through the business district. Braxton and Cole's leaseholder was raising rent to market value. Some said the company could absorb it. Others said it was the crack in the armor that would bring them down. On Monday morning, the notice was officially filed. Camden's silence told me he'd seen it. His lack of counteroffer told me he was scrambling. I poured myself another cup of tea. The game was no longer about whether I could win. It was about how spectacularly I intended to. It didn't take long for Camden to move. I expected panic, calls from lawyers, desperate offers. What I got instead was a move so calculating it almost impressed me. On Tuesday morning, I woke to an envelope slid under my door. Thick, expensive stationery. His head letter. "Celine, I think you've misunderstood the situation. It's in everyone's best interest to resolve this quietly. If we can't, I have no choice but to revisit certain past agreements. I'm sure you remember the ones I mean." Past agreements. The phrase was underlined. It was a threat wrapped in corporate politeness, and he wanted me to know it. I called Richard. He's going to try to drag up the old non-disclosure clauses, maybe even the pension review. Richard sighed. He's bluffing. You've got cleaner paperwork than he does. Maybe, but Camden's the kind who fights ugly when he's cornered.
By noon, I heard from Marla, the journalist. She'd caught wind of Camden's new tactic. He's talking to a compliance auditor, trying to make it look like you're under investigation. If it sticks, it could scare off anyone willing to back you. He's running a smear campaign before the story even breaks. Exactly. You still sure you want to go public? I didn't answer right away. I'd been in boardrooms long enough to know when someone was betting on my fear. Camden was counting on me to fold. That evening, I went through my personal files, the ones I'd kept off Braxton & Co.'s systems. Handwritten notes, signed copies, photos of ledger books from the early days, the kind of evidence that didn't just prove ownership, it proved integrity. I called Marla back. "We're not just going public," I told her. "We're going big. I'll give you everything, but the story has to run with one headline: The Woman They Couldn't Erase." She laughed. "Now you're speaking my language." The next day, Camden sent flowers to my nursing home room. 12 white lilies. There was no card. Lilies, funeral flowers, were his idea of subtlety. I put them in the hallway for anyone else to take. Dead flowers weren't my style. That night, Richard and I met in the small cafe across from the courthouse. We finalized the timeline. The rent adjustment was already in motion, but now the press would be in the loop too. The combination would be lethal to Camden's image. When we stepped outside, the wind cut sharp and cold. Richard looked at me, his hands deep in his coat pockets. "You know, Celine, you're enjoying this." I smiled. Not the fight itself, just the reminder that I'm still the one holding the pen. By Friday, Camden would realize this wasn't a war he could win quietly, and once the city saw who he really was, silence wouldn't save him.
By Friday morning, the city woke up to my face in the business section. The woman they couldn't erase. Marla had kept her word. The article was sharp, unflinching, detailing not only my ownership of the land beneath Braxton & Co.'s headquarters, but also the years of leadership I'd given the company before Randall's death. It told the story Camden wanted buried, the way a woman could build an empire and then be quietly shoved aside. The call started before I'd even finished breakfast. Old colleagues, former clients, even strangers, all congratulating me, some confessing they'd experienced the same kind of erasure. I took every call. Each voice was a reminder that this wasn't just my fight. By noon, Camden's lawyers filed an injunction to halt the rent adjustment. It was a desperate move, one that forced him to stand in court beside me that very afternoon. The moment we walked into the courtroom, the photographers pounced. Camden's jaw tightened. I didn't bother hiding my smile. The judge listened patiently as Camden's counsel argued about family misunderstandings and respect for legacy. My lawyer, Richard, rose and delivered a quiet dismantling of their claims, ending with the registered deeds signed in my name decades before Camden was even out of college. When the judge ruled in my favor, the air shifted. Camden's shoulders sagged just slightly. The rent adjustment would stand. The financial bleed had begun. Outside, the press swarmed. Cameras caught me saying exactly what I wanted the world to remember. It's never too late to take back your story, and it's never too late to hold people accountable. That night, I sat by the window in my nursing home room. The city lights flickered like 100 open eyes, watching, knowing.
I thought about the early mornings I'd spent drafting plans, the contracts I'd negotiated, the lives I built careers for. None of that had been erased, not really. It had only been waiting for the right moment to be written down in ink no one could scrub away. The next week, an anonymous delivery arrived, a single sheet of paper. It was Camden's resignation from Braxton & Co. No flowers this time, just silence. The kind of silence that follows a clean cut. Marla called again. She said, "You know, this could be a book." I told her, "Maybe, but for now, it's just the ending I needed." I didn't move out of the nursing home. I didn't need to. This was my vantage point now, a quiet perch from which to watch the empire shift slowly into something new. My story wasn't about escape anymore. It was about owning the ground I stood on, literally and otherwise. Because in the end, revenge wasn't fire. It was ink, permanent, and I'd signed my name to it.